Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Murtaugh, and I have the privilege and the pleasure to be the Vice President of Development and Alumni Relations at Eureka College. And on behalf of President J. David Arnold, the trustees, the students, faculty, staff, and the 7,411 alumni of Eureka College, I welcome you to this celebration of freedom on this, the 24th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. This celebration is a testament to the human spirit. In the Reagan Peace Garden on this campus, there is a relic of the Berlin Wall. It is ugly, it is grotesque, and it is a symbol of oppression and tyranny. It was a symbol of oppression and tyranny. The fall of that wall, that hideous wall, marked the end of the struggle of the Eastern European people who yearned for decades to be free. And today, that same wall is a symbol of freedom. The wall came down without firing a shot. No tank crashed through the wall. No bomb tore open the wall. The wall came down as a result of ordinary people standing for freedom. Today, we celebrate the commitment of the men and women of Eastern Europe who stood tall against communism. Today, we celebrate the commitment of the American people to stand tall against totalitarianism. Today, we honor veterans who answered our nation's call to defend freedom and to today continue to answer that call in places like Afghanistan. Today, we remember world leaders who had the courage and commitment and conviction to stand strong when others would have yielded. And that strength of leadership had no greater champion than that son of Eureka College, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, would you now please rise for the playing of the national anthem performed by the Eureka College Chorale under the direction of Dr. Joseph Henry and our invocation by the Eureka College chaplain, Reverend Bruce Fawkes.
Lord, according to your wise teacher in Ecclesiastes, there's a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to cry, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to tear down and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Clearly, God, we are your creatures and we get the timing all wrong sometimes. We build up where we should tear down, and sometimes we keep silent when we should speak out. We divide when we should unify. Forgive us our poor timing, especially when it brings suffering or injustice or conflict to your creation. Today we remember a moment in time when just the right convergence of voices, aspirations, events, and leaders brought a time of fullness, a time when tearing down became an occasion to dance on rubble, an occasion to embrace across what had been a kill zone, when bright visions of peace replaced the chilling shadows of war. Today we celebrate a moment when the world was liberated from a wall that ultimately failed to contain the aspirations of its people. Bless our celebration. Come help us truly believe in the heroic that is in all of us, the opportunities to follow our greater angels, to live according to our highest principles, the kind that inspired two powerful leaders to set aside what divided them in order to bring down a wall that split nation from nation, countryman from countryman, family from family. Come to us now, O God, with that same spirit of reconciliation, and expose our self-imposed walls of politics and class and race, nationality and religion, and thereby help us to catch a fleeting glimpse of how you see us, Lord, one human family, your beloved sons and daughters, one and all held close to you because of no merit of our own, but simply because we are all your beloved. Then, having seen ourselves in this gracious light, may we see others with that same brilliance. Walk among us, Lord. Make yourself known to us, God whose love knows no boundaries. Amen. You may be seated.
I'd just like to recognize a few people who helped to make this event happen, not the least of which is Mr. Mike Mangold of Mangold Ford, who was the sponsor of this wonderful event. Mike, would you please stand? Mike is also a trustee of the college, so he's my boss's boss, I guess. And we have several other trustees with us today. We have Dr. Tony Regazio, Mr. John Pini, Mr. Wayne Baum, and former trustees, Mr. John Bierce, Don Whitler, and Don Litweiler. By the way, the last three of those men were Marine, Army, Navy. United States Navy, United States veterans. Max Hutchinson is the president of the Eureka College student body. Max hails from Robinson, Illinois. He is a senior and a Reagan Fellow. The Reagan Fellowship is the only scholarship founded by a sitting president at his alma mater in the history of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Max Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mike. First off, I'd like to thank former student body president Liz Hoff. She had originally constructed the outline of this speech given traditionally every year. I'd also like to welcome some of our guests with us today. We have former Governor Jim Edgar. We have Medal of Honor recipient Hal Fritz and Dr. Now with us. So we're very glad to have them, as well as all of the other veterans here who served our country today. It's at this school that we really begin to learn to think critically, and it's through that critical thought that we develop our own vision and our own voice. And as we go about our day-to-day here on campus, we begin to trace the footsteps of alumni who came before us. One of those alumni goes all over this campus with his tracks, and he goes out to California, as well as to the White House. But today we're here to talk about the tracks that he left at the wall in Berlin. My generation lacks a first-hand perspective of the Cold War. I was born in 1991, 2 years after the wall began to come down in 1989. In fact, when I first arrived on campus, I was shown the Peace Garden. I said, well, that's a very nice bust of Ronald Reagan. These are very nice flowers, but I don't understand that piece of concrete. And luckily enough, I had people here to explain that to me. I had a freshman seminar class with Dr. Rodriguez, who obviously knows his history, which was explained, and we had wonderful people like Mike Murtaugh and John Morris to tell us about these things, and wonderful people like Mike Mangold to sponsor events like these. Today is our 5th Fall of the Wall ceremony, marking 24 years since the Berlin Wall came down. And it really helps us to appreciate the honor and the sacrifices of the generations before us, whose actions have conveyed to our generation a different kind of world, like the one they knew, one free from words like Iron Curtain, Cuban Missile Crisis, mutually assured destruction in the Berlin Wall. While my peers and I did not live during the ideological struggles of the Cold War, my generation need not have been physically present to appreciate the importance of the outcome of the Cold War and the victory of freedom over tyranny. In his 1987 speech to the Wall, President Reagan said this: "Today I say, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question for the freedom of all mankind." The fall of the Berlin Wall is a symbol for the reunification of Germany. It is a turning point for the collapse of the Soviet communism imposed on all those who lived behind the Iron Curtain. It represents the end of the Cold War. Perhaps most of all, the fall of the wall represents a gift to my generation. While we have grown up in a world still full of international conflict and threats and challenges, we are grateful that we do not know the constant cloud of the Cold War. We say thanks to many who have served in the military, and thanks to the leaders who stood up for freedom. Today there are 24 nations once under the cloud of communism, whose people are free. They have freedoms our own American founders once envisioned for our own people. They can speak their minds, make art, listen to music, travel, hold elections, create business, and worship in the way that they please. On behalf of the student body of Eureka College, I am pleased to read the names of each nation freer today than 24 years ago. Each flag will be carried into the auditorium by a Eureka College student for the celebration. The flags will be led by the American flag as a symbol for how our country continues to work to lead the world in the case of freedom. Please rise. The United States of America. Republic of Albania. Republic of Armenia. Republic of Azerbaijan. Republic of Belarus. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Republic of Bulgaria. Republic of Croatia. The Czech Republic. Republic of Estonia. Georgia. Federal Republic of Germany. Hungary. Republic of Kazakhstan. Republic of Latvia. Republic of Lithuania. Republic of Macedonia. Montenegro. Republic of Poland. Romania. The Russian Federation. The Slovak Republic. Republic of Serbia. Republic of Slovenia. And Ukraine. These are the 24 countries now free or freer since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Flag holders, please place your flags. You may be seated.
Isn't that a great sight? Isn't that just amazing? I'd just like to point out that the young man who carried the American flag is a combat veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He's also the safety on our football team, which happens to be 7-2. Thanks, Nick. Eureka College is very blessed in so many ways, but one way is in the caliber of our faculty, and one of the reasons is that it's a very diverse faculty. And on our staff, we actually have 2 men who are friends every day but once a year. Once a year. And that is because one graduated from West Point and one graduated from the Naval Academy. Bill Stoudemire and Mike Thurwanger. Would you please stand, gentlemen? We have another Navy veteran on our faculty, and that's Dr. Pat Grisham. Pat, where are you? Please stand. Dr. Mike Tolliver, who is a Marine combat veteran of the war in Vietnam, unfortunately could not make it today, but he is dear in our hearts, for sure. And he will be there on Tuesday for the groundbreaking on Sanders Hall, which I hope everyone can make as well. There are several additional veterans I'd just like to mention. They're the veterans of the greatest generation, the World War II veterans. And the first one is actually, believe it or not, a woman. Annette Sherman of the class of 1941 didn't serve in the armed forces, but what she was she was a cryptologist who helped to solve the Japanese code, which resulted in saving many, many, many lives in the Pacific Theater. Annette's brother was killed in action over occupied Europe during World War II. Annette, would you please stand? Now, are there 3 Eureka College members of the greatest generation that are here? There are probably, hopefully, some others in the audience, but the Eureka College alums who are here, who are members of the greatest generation, are Doc Traster of the class of 1948, Carl Hirsch of the class of 1951, and Dick Nelson of the class of 1952. Now, these men have something else very special, not the least of which that they all married well, and they married up. But all three have endowed scholarships here at Eureka College so that students in perpetuity will be allowed to attend this wonderful institution. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Next to Dick is his best buddy, Ed Pegg, who is also a Navy veteran. There's one other veteran of Eureka College I'm going to mention because it's special. It's truly special and very historic in many respects, and that's Dan Harrod. Dan is a Vietnam-era veteran for the United States Air Force. Dan's grandfather was provost of the college who gave Ronald Reagan, or approved for Ronald Reagan to have the needy student scholarship. That act was transformational in the history of the world. Without Dan's grandfather, chances are, world history would have been different. While I'm at it, will all the veterans in this auditorium please stand and be recognized? Thank you so much. Thank you for your service to our great nation. We have one other truly special veteran with us today, and he is Lieutenant Colonel Hal Fritz, United States Army, retired. Sir. I could read his citation. It is a citation that is fraught with heroism. But let's put it in a different perspective. We are a nation of close to 315 million people. And yet, in our nation of 315 million people, less than 100 men are living who have received our nation's highest military award, the Congressional Medal of Honor. Less than 100 men. It's probably less than 80. Living Americans can wear that decoration. It is my privilege to introduce to you a hero, Colonel Hal Fritz. Colonel. Thank you so much, Colonel. This is your turn.
Mike, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's certainly my pleasure to be here. President Arnold, Governor Edgar, Dr. Nell, my personal friend and dear colleague, Mr. John Bierce, United States Marine Corps, Korea, fellow veterans and distinguished guests. It's my distinct pleasure to have been invited to participate in this very important landmark of freedom and a most justifiable tribute to the leadership of then President Ronald Reagan. As president of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, I currently represent 78 living recipients of the 3,365 medals of honor that have been presented since its approval by President Lincoln in 1863. These warriors and brothers that I represent have demonstrated unquestionable valor in conflict with an armed enemy in defense of freedom for people and nations throughout the world. Each of us wear our medals of honor and ribbons of valor as messengers, heralding the valor, the dedication, and the sacrifice of the many men and women of the United States Armed Forces that have served and are serving with courage and distinction throughout the world in the name of freedom. We gather this afternoon to also recognize the courage of President Ronald Reagan, who without political or peer pressure issued a challenge to a strong Soviet leader to tear down the wall, a wall that deprived the people of East Germany the opportunity to embrace the freedoms available to others that lived on the West German side of the wall. President Reagan boldly issued a challenge without regard to how it would favorably reflect on his political position and future. His leadership, family background, and beliefs in preserving freedom for all were the driving forces that caused him to make a bold and almost precarious challenge on behalf of a separated nation of the German people. The importance of freedom and its associated costs are often overlooked by many Americans. Even as a result of the terrible attacks during 9/11, terrorist attacks in New York and Washington, D.C., there are still Americans who have not gained a true appreciation of what freedoms we as Americans can experience on a daily basis across our continent, and the associated high cost in maintaining those freedoms, not only for the present, but for future generations of Americans. I recently spent 9 days in the country of Israel. This area, referred to as the State of Israel, is a country of many dedicated Jewish families living under the constant threat of rocket and terrorist attacks. The complexity of the situation involving the Gaza Strip, West Bank, occupational force boundaries, kidnappings, suicide bombers, and long-time alliances versus territorial disagreements creates a most volatile situation. Iran has stated Israel is a one-bomb country and continues to build its nuclear capability towards nuclear bomb capability. The Hamas, with headquarters on the Gaza Strip, continue efforts directed towards terrorism aimed at Israel. During our visit, a tunnel over a mile long from the Gaza Strip to Israel was discovered. This tunnel was built with reinforced concrete, complete with electricity and communications. The concrete was a result of Israel's contribution when they left the Gaza Strip to be used for friendly purposes. The purpose of the tunnel, designed to infiltrate Israel undetected to conduct abductions and other terrorist activities. Also during our visit, a Palestinian terrorist was shot and killed when disguised as a farm worker. He attempted to breach an Israeli Defense Force position. The situation between Israel and Palestine continues to be tense. And during a session between our visiting group and the Palestinian negotiators, they were asked by us what they were doing to help resolve the issues between Palestine and Israel, to help heal the wounds existing between those countries. Their answer to the question, we are not here to make friends. As we look at all the wonderful opportunities that our country has available to each of its citizens, one must consider that without our military and its ability to become a strong deterrent force, what would we have become? Ronald Reagan was able to project the importance of freedom globally and made a deliberate and daring decision which led to a major world change for many, not only in Germany, but throughout the world. May we always support and hope there would be and continue to be men and women of Ronald Reagan's focus and daring to move us continually in a positive future. Ladies and gentlemen, I certainly thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you this afternoon. God bless America, and God bless the freedom that we enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colonel. Thank you so much. Last year at this ceremony, Dr. Kodran Nadida, the professor of economics here at Eureka College, spoke of his experience living and growing up behind the Iron Curtain. I personally think that one of the greatest living legacies of Ronald Reagan is that the professor of economics at his alma mater was born behind the Iron Curtain and now has the opportunity to be here with us. Dr. Nadida is in the audience. Could you please stand, Doctor? Today we will hear from a student of Eureka College whose parents were born behind the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe under Soviet communism and learn of their struggle to live free. Luana Dumitru is a junior Reagan Fellow majoring in chemistry. Ladies and gentlemen, Luana Dumitru.
Each year, I take particular delight in the celebration we have of the liberating of 24 nations which were under communism, because as a student of Romanian heritage, I have the privilege of proudly carrying my flag and remembering to be personally grateful for the valiant efforts put forward by a popular alum of this college and many other supporters in this nation. Every day, I am able to live at this institution with the same privileges as any other student, but I did not arrive here in the same way. My parents, Adiel and Silvia Dumitru, were born and raised behind the Iron Curtain in communist Romania. While growing up, I often took pride in showing off my parents' foreign accents or being bilingual, and I can't say that I don't do the same today. But I did not understand the stark contrast of my upbringing in Canada versus theirs in Romania. In recent years, I have realized that their humility and incredible faith in God's protection are a rare commodity, because they never introduced themselves as superheroes. Yet even in my time at Eureka, while learning more about Ronald Reagan's efforts for freedom, my eyes have been opened to the position my parents were in before, and where liberty has brought our family today. Before, Romania was under the communist regime of dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. Rights of the citizens were stripped away one by one so that the government could have central control over everything. One example is the stripping away of property. My mother was the youngest of 10 siblings, and when she was 14 years old, her family's house and land was taken away from them, with only 3 small apartments given as recompense. Another was dignity. Under communism, each year only 0.8% of high school students could continue on to higher education, regardless of the number of capable students. These numbers were controlled by university entrance exams written by the government, making them more difficult than normal. Liberty was hindered to everyone. Freedom of religion did not exist, as each church had a government official at every service to monitor what was talked about, and fines or imprisonment were often given to religious people. The people did not have freedom to speak. My parents grew up with only 2 hours of television each day, and it was always updates about government actions. Newspapers also covered only what was connected to labor. The radio was slightly more relaxed, as Romania could receive programs from outside of the country which were translated into Romanian. The Voice of America or Switzerland, which was part of Free Europe, ran on a program for 4 hours every night. Through these stations, Romanians learned of the efforts to gain freedom from communism for Poland, predominantly led by President Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul II, who was of Polish descent, and Lech Walesa, head of the labor union in Poland. This sparked hope for a similar change in Romania. When the Berlin Wall began to come down on November 9, 1989, uprisings began in the Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, former Yugoslavia, and Romania. The fall of communism in Romania finally occurred from December 16th to 22nd, 1989. Approximately 1,100 Romanians died during the struggle for liberation. My parents were married in August of 1989, when liberty for Romania was just a distant hope, and this only 4 months before the fall of the regime. Even after December, when the dictator was overthrown, corruption and personal gain lurked in every facet of life, including getting a job or a place to live. For this reason and many others, my parents decided to leave the country. For 3 months after the fall of communism in Romania, there was a political and economic void which led many people to adopt an anarchist mindset, and many left the country. When the new government finally started gaining control again, they decided to close borders for a time to avoid the confusion of insider and outsider influence. Because of the tension caused around Romanians, in March of 1990, after a phone call to my mom, my dad put together 2 suitcases and fled to a refugee camp in Vienna, at his last chance before borders wouldn't let Romanians through anymore. My mom followed a month later by stealthily making her way across the Austrian border, after it had already been closed to Romanians for fear of the anarchists. After finally being united under liberty of some fashion, which consisted of sharing a space with 3 other refugee families, my parents spent the next 2 years in Austria, where they were moved into 3 different homes and had my sister and brother. As most refugees, they awaited the first opportunity to leave for the United States, Canada, or Australia. My parents' end goal was California, but when a door opened to go to Montreal, Quebec, they took their 2 kids, both under a year old, and arrived in Canada with $6,000 to their names. And that's where I had my beginning, oblivious to the steps it took to become the first person in all of my extended family to be born in North America. 20 years later, I have just grazed the meaning of what my parents did for our family. I practice liberty every day, though I often take for granted the lifestyle I have versus my cousins who are still in Romania and face the communist influence of things like bribery in schools. I can't help but thank Eureka College for helping me appreciate my liberty more, appreciate my family more. It took hearing the words from someone else's mouth to realize how fortunate I am to be standing here today under these circumstances, and I won't ever stop treasuring it. For those sitting here today who have had a direct role in gaining me the freedom which has shaped my entire life, I thank you, and now I can truly say I appreciate you. Lastly, I want to recognize my parents, Adiel and Sylvia Dumitriu, for understanding the value of freedom and for joining me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luana. That was a wonderful story. And thank you for having such a wonderful daughter to help share that story. 2 years ago, this young woman was sitting in this auditorium. Her name is Elitsa Popapov, and she is from Bulgaria. And unfortunately, Elitsa is not with us today. She returned to Bulgaria, but because of social networking, my colleague John Morris and I are able to keep up with Elitsa, who today at Sofia University in Bulgaria is manning the barricades because her country is regressing into totalitarianism. And she, like her contemporaries, like other freedom fighters, is fighting the fight. And she asked John and I to tell all of you how wonderful it was to be a part of this celebration 2 years ago, and how she hopes that someday she can have a celebration like this in her native Bulgaria. Before I make my next introduction, I would like to recognize any other people who were born behind the Iron Curtain. If there is anyone else here who was born behind the Iron Curtain, could you please stand? Well, thank you so much. The 26th president of Eureka College is a man who appreciates and values the significance and importance of this ceremony. The son of a Navy veteran, Dr. Arnold understands the important role the college has played in shaping the character of Ronald Reagan, and is steadfast in his resolve to make Eureka College the national leader in service, learning, and leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to introduce to you, in his 9th year as president of Eureka College, Dr. J. David Arnold.
Mr. Murtaugh has recognized person after person. I would like to recognize Mr. Murtaugh. He is a career naval officer. He and his partner in creativity, John Morris, worked on this ceremony. It's evolved. Our first year we were outside. It was beautiful. You saw the slide earlier with the fireworks. But we've learned from each year, and I'm very thankful, Mike, that we're inside this year. So my role today is to introduce Governor Edgar, who is an extraordinary public servant and an extraordinary friend of Eureka College. Governor Edgar's service to the people of Illinois spans 30 years. He worked in the legislative branch of government for 10 years, including his election to the Illinois House of Representatives. Governor Edgar served for 20 years in the executive branch of government, including 10 years as Secretary of State and 8 years as Illinois' 38th governor. First elected governor in 1990, Governor Edgar was reelected in 1994 by the widest margin in Illinois history. Governor Edgar, even back in the 90s, inherited a state teetering on bankruptcy and successfully restored fiscal stability and integrity by restructuring state government. When he entered office in 1991, the state was $1 billion in debt. After 8 years of his leadership, the state enjoyed a $1.5 billion surplus. Wouldn't it be great to have that transformation again? As a public servant, Governor Edgar made children a priority. His historic efforts to establish a minimum foundation level in our public schools made it possible for all regions of the state to provide adequate educational access. He also initiated programs to increase adoption rates, moving the state from the bottom of the 50 states to a national leader. Upon leaving office, the Chicago Tribune stated that Governor Edgar's, quote, instincts and motives were as sound as those of any governor the state has ever had. Governor Edgar left the office with the highest approval rating in state history, which prompted a Chicago columnist to state that Governor Edgar's popularity in Illinois was second to only Michael Jordan. Governor Edgar currently serves as a distinguished fellow at the University of Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs. He lectures at other colleges and universities like Eureka. In 1999, the governor was a resident fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. The governor serves on a variety of corporate and civic boards. He is the President Emeritus of the Abraham Lincoln Library Foundation. And he has become such a great friend of Eureka College during our centennial year, our Reagan centennial year. He was our honorary chair. He was here when we announced our centennial plans. He was the speaker at the dinner of our centennial conference, Reagan in the Midwest. And most recently, you will see in Mosier Lobby this wonderful trophy that has the bust of young Lincoln. That trophy was purchased for Eureka and Knox College by Governor Edgar. Please welcome to the podium a great American, a great governor, and a great friend of Eureka College, Governor Jim Edgar.
Thank you. Well, thank you, President Arnold. It's indeed my pleasure to be back on the campus of Ronald Reagan. And I think all of us who have gone to college, we know how important that is in our lives. And I think every day the people of Eureka College can feel proud of the impact they had on a great leader and a great president. It's my pleasure to be here today to get to talk about something I don't get to talk about too much. Usually they ask me to talk about, what are you going to do about the pensions? What are you going to, all those things at the state level that are pretty grim. So I'm delighted today to talk a little bit on my thoughts on one of the most positive things that happened in my lifetime. The day that the Berlin Wall came down was one of those days that I will never forget. As a young person in Charleston, Illinois, one of the first things I remember following on international news was the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. And I was so disappointed, I was shattered to think that Hungary did not get their freedom after that brave effort on the part of the Hungarians. And it always bothered me that here we had such a large part of the world's population behind the Iron Curtain. But 24 years ago today, we saw that begin to change. Now, the fall of the Berlin Wall was not just significant because it meant the people of East Berlin and of East Germany would now be free, but it symbolized the fall of the Iron Curtain, something that was originally coined by Winston Churchill at another American college in Fulton, Missouri in 1946. Now, I don't remember that. That was about 3 months before I was born. I wasn't tracking things that well then. But I do remember when the Berlin Wall went up. And again, the frustration that a lot of people felt because here again, the communists were imposing a dictatorship, taking away opportunity and freedom to people in Eastern Europe. But then that glorious day 24 years ago came. You know, there's points in history I've often thought I would have loved to have been there. And that's one of those days. In fact, when that happened, I was in the midst of a gubernatorial campaign and was told I really couldn't go jump on a plane and fly to Berlin like some people did. But that's something I wish I had done because the importance of that day. For many of the students here, this might seem like something in history, and it is. But it's one of the most significant days, not only in American, but in world history. Now, a couple of years before the fall of the Berlin Wall, I had the opportunity to go to Hungary when it was still run by the communists. There was a young political leader exchange program. And I remember going, and of course I wanted to talk about the Hungarian Revolution. They didn't. But quietly, people would come up to me and try not to be heard by anybody and said, things are going to change. I don't think they realized how quick things were going to change. In less than 2 years, things really changed. Now, why did they change? And again, I think it's important for us not only to remember this very important date, but to learn the lessons from this important day. Particularly the lessons of leadership that were demonstrated by President Reagan. I can remember when President Reagan made the speech and said, tear down this wall. But he did more than just talk. He backed it up with making sure that the United States and Western Europe had the strongest possible military to challenge any aggression by the Soviet Union. And I remember he took a lot of flack for that, particularly from the left. But then President Reagan showed another important part of leadership, not only standing up for what you believe, but also recognizing there comes a time when you need to reach out and be willing to negotiate with your adversaries. And when Mikhail Gorbachev demonstrated or showed that he might be a little different Soviet leader than we'd dealt with before, President Reagan had the courage to reach out and work with him. And this time, he took criticism from the right. But again, one of the magics of President Reagan, I don't think he cared about criticism. He cared about doing what he thought was right, being strong, and then from strength, being able to negotiate and being able to reach out. Both of those gentlemen showed, I think, a characteristic we could use a little more of in politics and in government. That was a civility, a willingness to meet the adversary halfway and to see if they couldn't solve the problem. Well, they solved the problem. And because of their willingness to come together and try to launch a new world, when the Berlin Wall occurred, it occurred not with gunshot, has been mentioned. We often thought it was going to be a terrible war whenever we freed Eastern Europe. It was accomplished without one gunshot. It was accomplished because thousands of Berlin citizens realized they wanted freedom. They wanted what President Reagan had been talking about. They wanted what they could see in the other parts of the world. And that spread throughout all of Eastern Europe. Now, I had the opportunity a few years ago to go back to Budapest, Hungary. And it was amazing in 15 years how much that had changed. From a city that was dark and gloomy and people who whispered to you, it was now a city vibrant and alive with people enjoying life, people out doing what they wanted to do. Now, I often thought when I saw a lot of these young people in Budapest, as maybe some of the young people here, I don't know if they appreciated what their parents went through to get them to where they are today. But what occurred 24 years ago, what we saw happen was the triumph of freedom, the triumph of democracy. These Eastern European countries, they don't maybe have a perfect democracy, and some people might say we may not have a perfect democracy in America, but they have far more freedom and opportunity than they did 24 years ago. And to a great extent, that happened because of President Reagan and a gentleman named Mikhail Gorbachev, who's not very well thought of in his country today, but I think is one of also the great heroes of our time. But most importantly, it happened because of millions of people in Eastern Europe who for many, many decades had only known communist dictatorship. They still wanted freedom. And the power of freedom prevailed over all the military might of the Soviet Union and their satellite countries. And that's a lesson I think we should never forget, the power of freedom and how much people around the world want to enjoy what we've been fortunate for hundreds of years to enjoy here in America. And we should never determine, ever not appreciate the power of freedom. And we also, as Americans, as around the world, should make sure we do everything to make sure that we and all the people in this world enjoy the freedom that is so important. Again, I am delighted to be here and to join you as we remember one of the most significant days in the history of this world, a day that a graduate of Eureka College made possible. Thank you very much.
Dr. Henry Now is a professor of political science and international affairs in the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Now holds a B.S. degree in economics, politics, and science from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and an M.A. and Ph.D. degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. His latest book, Conservative Internationalism, Armed Diplomacy Under Jefferson, Polk, Truman, and Reagan, was published this August by Princeton University Press. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Henry Now.
Thank you very much. This has been a remarkable and very inspirational afternoon. I have spent 50 years in the world of colleges, and it is a special honor for me to be here in the college of a man that I admired so greatly and that I was fortunate enough to serve for 3 years on his National Security Council from 1981 to 1983. Let me make just two remarks and impress them upon you. One is to say something about the wall that Reagan tore down or helped to tear down. But then secondly, also to talk just a second about the wall that Reagan was, a man of enormous strength, which one can only understand, I think, if one comes to Eureka College and understands where this man came from. Many people today remember Ronald Reagan's famous lines now when he stood in front of the Berlin Wall at the Brandenburg Gate, and he said the following: General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberation, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now, what many people perhaps don't know is that Reagan had a long association with the idea of the wall and a long disgust with the idea of the wall. He never accepted the legitimacy of the borders that separated East from West after World War II, that is, communism from freedom. in Central Europe. He rejected the Yalta agreements of February 1945, when the Soviet Union and the United States effectively divided Europe into two separate spheres. And then when the wall went up along the Yalta dividing line in 1961, Reagan almost immediately advocated that the wall be torn down. In a debate with Robert Kennedy in 1967, Reagan said the following. He first advocated tearing the wall down, and then he said, quote, "We don't want to knock down the Berlin Wall so that it is easier for us to get at the throats of the East Germans. We just think that a wall that has been put up to confine people and keep them within their own country instead of allowing them the freedom of world travel somehow has to be wrong." In 1981, during the Polish crisis, when Soviet divisions massed on the borders of Poland to force the imposition of martial law, Reagan did not see this event as a mere security threat. He saw it as an opportunity to eliminate the wall and to raise the Iron Curtain. He wrote in his diary at that time, "This may be the last chance in our lifetime to see a change in the Soviet Empire's colonial policy." He then said a few days later to a reporter, quote, "There is reason for optimism because I think there must be," this is by the way now 1981, "there's reason for optimism because I think there must be an awful lot of people in the Iron Curtain countries who feel the same way as the Poles do. Our job now," he said, "is to do everything we can to see that their protest does not die a mourning. We may never get another chance like this in our lifetime." When he visited the wall in 1982, he called it, quote, "as ugly as the idea behind it," end quote. And when he was asked if Berlin would ever reunite, he said simply, yes. In February of 1845, he made it very clear in a formal government declaration on the 40th anniversary of Yalta. He said, "There is one boundary that can never be made legitimate, and that is the dividing line between freedom and oppression. I do not hesitate to say that we wish to undo this boundary." Undoing that boundary liberated these 24 countries whose flags we have here on our stage today. So Reagan's famous line in 1987 to tear down the wall was hardly a last-minute idea. It was brewing in his mind for years, and it did not matter that every one of his principal advisors at the time recommended that he strike that statement from his speech. He had to keep adding it in. And in the automobile going to the gate to give the speech, he was with his chief of staff, he had to reinsert it because the advisors wanted that out of there. They thought it was going to be too provocative. But for Reagan, it was a no-brainer. It followed from everything he believed about the origins of the Cold War and the ugly oppression that communism had visited upon the peoples of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. The division of Europe was illegitimate. The Iron Curtain constituted an unconscionable prison of the human spirit, and the Berlin Wall, which symbolized all of these scars on human dignity, had to be torn down. Now, Reagan tore the wall down, but Reagan was himself a wall. And I want to close by just telling you a little story, which has always stayed in my mind vividly from the days that I worked with him. I went into his office in November of 1982 with my boss, Judge Bill Clark, who just died, unfortunately, this summer, a very close friend and associate of Ronald Reagan. And I went in with another staff person who was going to brief the president on the status of arms control discussions with the Soviet Union. And I was to brief the president on the status of the global economy. I had just returned from a major trade ministerial meeting in Geneva in November of 1982. And we had very, very dismal reports to make to the president. You have to remember in the fall of 1982 now, the American economy was still in the doldrums. We had had a terrible meeting in Geneva where all of the countries were accusing us of wrecking the world economy and creating high interest rates and causing all sorts of turmoil in trade markets. There was little sign in November of 1982 that any of this was going to change. My colleague reported to him on the arms control discussions, which had failed that summer when a proposal which everyone hoped would be accepted was not accepted by Ronald Reagan, the so-called walk in the woods proposal. So the arms control negotiations were going nowhere. And protests were beginning to arise now in the United States, in Europe, against the deployment of nuclear missiles, the intermediate nuclear missiles that NATO had pledged to deploy by the fall of 1983. So things were bad. So my boss looked at him after our briefings. Judge Clark looked at him and said, "Mr. President, do you think we need to start thinking about Plan B?" And President Reagan sort of looked at him. He kind of rocked back in his chair, and he said, "No, Bill," he said, "I don't think so." He said, "You know, my economic plan is in place, and, you know, I think the Soviet Union is eventually going to come around in the arms control talks." And then he looked at my boss and he says, "And Bill, what's the worst thing that can happen to you and me if that doesn't happen?" Bill said, "I don't know." And the president looked at him and said, "You and I go back to the ranch." This was an incredible moment, really, when Ronald Reagan made it very clear to us, here's where I stand, these are my policies, I think they're going to work, and I'll just give them time to work, and if they don't work, and if the American people decide that that's not what they want, I will be very happy to go back to the ranch. He was a wall. He was a wall who believed so strongly in what he was doing that he would not be moved. So when you young people who always inspire me so greatly, not just today, but for 50 years, these young students, when you look at that wall out here in the garden, think not just about the wall that Reagan tore down. Think about the wall that Reagan was, and about the wall that you are building here, your wall of education, strength, courage, determination that's going to carry you forward on your mission to continue to spread and promote freedom and prosperity around the world. Thank you.
Dr. Now will be signing his book after, in a few short minutes, out in the Mosher lobby. The book can be purchased in the Eureka College bookstore, along with some Eureka hoodies and sweatshirts and other things that look great this time of year, and holiday shopping is coming on. We always end our programs at Eureka College with the singing of the alma mater, and we will do that now with Dr. Henry. After that, though, we have a little different. We would like everybody to take your seats again, because we have a special presentation from a special graduate of Eureka College. Dr. Henry.
if we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David, they add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Belleau Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles of a place called Vietnam. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. We must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. We are Americans.
Thank you so much for attending this celebration of freedom today. You're all welcome to join us for a reception in the Terrell Room. And next year will be the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you have not seen nothing yet. Thank you so much.